Hello, my name's Alex Davidson and I'm a cinema curator here at the Barbican, and I'm really excited that on Tuesday the 12th of September we'll be hosting the European premiere of a brand new restoration of a 1992 film called Amazing Grace, directed by an Israeli director called Amos Gutman. And Amazing Grace is about a young Israeli gay guy who moves to Tel Aviv to find love, to find fun, to find human connection. And he strikes up a relationship with an older man who is HIV positive. And not a lot is known about this film in the UK, but luckily I'm joined by Barbican head of cinema, Gally Gold, to talk a bit more about the film. And this film is from 1992. Did you first see the film in 1992? When did you first see it?
I have, and I was 22 at the time, just starting kind of my journey as a gay woman. And I remember so well, actually mainly coming out of the cinema, totally stunned by this experience. This was one of the first films that overtly depicted gay relationship, HIV and AIDS. It was unseen before. There was beauty and melancholy in it that just was captivating. And I remember just taking myself out. It's a cinema that doesn't exist anymore. And, you know, those moments where cinema affects you so much that you just have to keep walking. And it stayed with me ever since. I was so pleased to find out that the Israeli Cinema Archive decided to restore it, because this is a film that was so influential, but actually didn't really receive the attention it deserves, neither the film and to an extent also its director, who, you know, Amos Gutman was a real pioneer of Israeli cinema. At the time, the critics as well as the gay community didn't really give him and his films the credit and the status that they deserve.
And when people think of queer life in Israel, or even queer representation in Israeli cinema, they might think of the films of Eitan Fox, or they might think of Pride celebrations in Tel Aviv. What was it like when this film was released in the early 1990s?
So the early 1990s were very different. And Amos Gutman depicted actually the life of the marginalized people, including himself, obviously, as a gay man. Someone who was talking about his authenticity, his individualism, far from the kind of Israeli collective that was celebrating mainly kind of heroic masculine figures. So this was a really daring statement. This is not party time, but it is very much life of individuals that lived there all along and were, you know, put center stage. And that was so revolutionary at the time. This was pre kind of the pride parades and the parties that we, you know, so many are going to Tel Aviv for.
And you said that this film wasn't embraced by queer audiences when it was first released. Why do you think that might be?
I think that Amos Gutman was not trying to be seen as, you know, politically correct. He was doing his own thing. He wanted to bring his life and the life of the people around him to the center. He loved cinema and, you know, was talking about cinema as the medium that actually saved him. He was not about, you know, here we are, we're like you. He was, here we are, maybe different, but with a life that is profoundly worth looking at. He is considered today, you know, as one of the most important Israeli filmmakers. But at the time, as I said, and actually over the years, the gay community was far from embracing him. I was really moved to find out that the premiere that was held now of the restoration at the Jerusalem Film Festival just now this July was attended by most of the cast. These are people who are leading, you know, the Israeli film industry, very well-known actors that at the time were cast by Amos in his films. And what a momentous kind of occasion that was for all of them to look back and to give the film the respect and appreciation it really deserves.
When I was watching the film, there were other directors who came to mind. I think it's a very unique film. I think it's told with a really unique voice. But there are some elements, I thought, that remind me of other queer pioneers. There's this beautiful dream sequence where the young gay hero is looking through an erotic magazine and then goes into this actually very beautiful fantasy, which kind of to me echoed Derek Jarman a bit. Are there any other filmmakers who come to mind when you're thinking of some of the aesthetics, like particularly maybe, like for me, Pedro Almodovar to some degree?
Absolutely. I
Has
think
that
Derek
flavour.
Jarman, and he was kind of compared to him. I think Almodovar, again, thinking about, he cast one of the first kind of transgender women in the film. And the aesthetic of these kind of, again, marginal life that was depicted in so much tenderness and beauty. And again, like Almodovar, bringing that camp kind of language into cinema and into the experience and life of gay people is both very unique in the Israeli cinema scene, but actually is absolutely comparable to European homosexual, and gay directors.
And why do you think Amazing Grace is still an important film today?
I think first and foremost, it's as a moment in cinema that marked the kind of beginning of self-representation by gay filmmakers, non-apologetic, being really authentic, finding their own language within cinema, and telling stories that are in the history of cinema were not actually regarded as worthwhile. This is specifically a moment in Israeli cinema, but as we know, the 90s was a moment like that, similar to that in many countries over the world over. And I think that, for audiences generally and for gay audiences, it's a moment of self-realization and really like an expression of the variety and diversity, both of human experiences, but also of the cinematic language to tell those stories.
And how was the film received by critics when the film was released?
We have to remember this was a very low-budget film, that was made almost against all odds. But what's really interesting is that the cast, the people who, as actors, who took part in the film, all were great believers in Amos Gutman and his creation, and therefore joined forces. However, that did not translate to great reception by critics at the time. However, at the Jerusalem Film Festival back in '92, where the film was premiered, it actually won the award for Best Film. So that was an amazing recognition, and in a way did a bit of justice to a filmmaker that was so momentous, and so important in his generation. Sadly, a few months later, despite the fact that the film was nominated to 13 categories within the Israeli Academy Award, it won none. And Amos, who was actually, in many ways, this was an autobiographical story. Amos Gutman was HIV positive, had AIDS, and then very soon after, he died in February '93. So knowing that both he won the Volgin Award at the Jerusalem Film Festival, but did not win the Israel Academy Award.
And what do you think Amos Gutman's legacy is?
I think that the voice of the independent filmmaker, a person who feels the urgency of telling stories of people who don't have a voice, finding the individual within a society that has such a collective imposition and fighting against that in his form of masculinity, in his search for love that is not heterosexual love, in his search for a life that is far from what is perceived as worth living.